Unless you wanna bet that I can get you back inside your head before the summer ends and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be, I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah.
Welcome to Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. And now here's your host, Rich Barris.
Welcome to Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. Almost didn't get it there. I had a totally different outfit on. First day with my new lip. I went to go drink without the just spilled everywhere all over me. I had to run and get changed real quick. All right. First of all, for people who didn't see the post yesterday on the YouTube community, if you're a member on YouTube, and I see a bunch of you in there right now in the chat, now I'll post the locals link to the community. Only members will be able to see it, but to the community on YouTube, so you can get the passcode and the Zoom link to join the book club. Because yesterday, and we had a bunch of new people that came, which was awesome. And we talked about offshore balancers, right? We're reading Tragedy of Great Power Politics. And next week will be, by the way these things are going in Ukraine, next week will be a great week to read the next chapter, which we'll have some discussion because we got all the way through chapter 7 this past week. Offshore balancers being the United States and the United Kingdom, and how they acted in accordance with realism or not, and which kind of realism, offensive, defensive. And I got to tell you, folks, if you can join this thing, it's 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Local supporters, YouTube members. All right, if you can join this thing, you better do it, because every week it is so relevant to what is going on. It's not even funny. I mean, I couldn't have done this anymore. It was not intentional. It's just the way things were going. Last time we read Jack Snyder's Myth of Empire, which is defensive realism. This time we're reading The Tragedy of Great Power Politics, which is offensive realism. And we'll get into more, and we always talk about other schools as well, but you'll love it. So I highly, highly, highly suggest, if you can't make it live, check out the rewind. We always put it up afterwards. It's over 2 hours long, so it'll take some time, but that new recording will be up today. I'll make sure it's up today. All right, moving forward, we'll talk some more about 2024 polling, what we've done here. We changed the likely voter screen to reflect 2024 vote history, some of the stuff we went over on Friday. But before we even get into this, all right, all of that other stuff, the Wall Street Journal. Okay, we have to talk about this article on the origins of COVID. And I thought to myself, does this make an exception to the rule on why people believe lies? And we've been talking about this for months now, or weeks, going on almost 2 months. And we'll talk about how public opinion on this changed or evolved. Did it change and evolve? Where were people on this issue a year ago, 2 years ago? What did they think? Because the media took so long to come around to this, right? For those of you who follow me on Twitter, @peoples_pundit, you see I went back to Glenn Kessler, the fact checker. The fact checker. We deal in facts, Ted Cruz, at the Washington Post. His very clear attempt to cover up the Wuhan lab leak theory, all right? And at the time, was it really a theory? We'll play some clips, and then I'm going to tell you something you probably don't know, but it's 100% true. All right. All right. So first of all, let's get to the report itself. All right. And here it is. The Wall Street Journal finally comes out. Lab leak, most likely origin of COVID-19 pandemic. Energy Department now says. There are also intelligence reports on this. There have been since before Donald Trump left the White House. So before we get into, actually, no, let's do it first. Let's read the report first, and then we're going to take a little trip back in time. We're going to get reaction from the Biden White House, and then we're going to look at what the American voter thought about this issue from not the jump, but pretty early on in the process. All right. So Wall Street Journal. All right. Blah, blah, blah. U.S. agencies' revised assessment is based on new intelligence. And whether that's true or not, just keep that in mind as we go into the later parts. All right. The U.S. Energy Department has concluded that the COVID-19 pandemic most likely arose from a laboratory leak, according to a classified intelligence report recently provided to the White House and key members of Congress. The shift by the Energy Department, which previously was undecided on how the virus emerged, is noted in an update to a 2021 document by Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines' office. The new report highlights how different parts of the intelligence community have arrived at desperate judgments about the pandemic's origins. The Energy Department now joins the Federal Bureau of Investigation in saying the virus likely spread via a mishap at a Chinese laboratory. 4 other agencies, along with the National Intelligence Panel, still judge that it was likely the result of a natural transmission, and 2 are undecided. The Energy Department's conclusion is the result of new intelligence and is significant because the agency has considered scientific expertise and oversees a network of U.S. national laboratories, some of which conduct advanced biological research. The Energy Department made its judgment with low confidence, according to people who have read the classified report. The FBI previously came to the conclusion that the pandemic was likely the result of a lab leak in 2021 with moderate confidence and still holds to this view. The FBI employs a cadre of microbiologists, immunologists, and other scientists, and it's supported by the National Bioforensic Analysis Center, which was established at Fort Detrick, Maryland in 2004 to analyze anthrax and other possible biological threats. U.S. officials declined to give details on the fresh intelligence and analysis that led the Energy Department to change its position. They added that while the Energy Department and the FBI each say an unintended lab leak is most likely, they arrived at those conclusions for different reasons. That's true. The updated document underscores how intelligence officials are still putting together the pieces of how COVID-19 emerged. More than 1 million Americans have died in the pandemic that began more than 3 years ago. It is no longer pandemic, it is endemic by definition. Come on. The National Intelligence Council, which conducts long-term strategic analysis, and 4 agencies, which officials decline to identify, still assess with low confidence that the virus came about through natural transmission from an infected animal, according to the updated report. As we will show you very clearly, there is no evidence other than that's what Dr. Fauci wanted people to believe. Dr. Fauci, the WHO, and others. And then we're going to tell you about some analysis you've never heard about. But believe you me, the Wall Street Journal has. Believe you me, the New York Times has, who also echoed this report. Believe you me, the Washington Post has, who Glenn Kessler has refused to update his thing. On and on and on. Fox News, CNN, MSNBC. And I know this because I know the officials who are giving them this information. The Central Intelligence Agency and other agency that officials wouldn't name remain undecided because the lab leak and natural transmission theories, the people have read the class report read between them, right? But there is an agency that actually did have their own conclusion, and along with another department that we just ignored and have ignored since Donald Trump was president. That's how early they had this information, or at least some of these agencies and departments, which we're going to share with you, concluded that it was, in fact, at least a lab leak. And actually, that's funny. What's funny about this is I haven't read this one. I don't know about this one, but I can tell you I have had personal eyes on another one. And it didn't really stress the lab leak. It simply states that it came from a lab, intentional or not, which is why we worded the question the way we did when we polled it, all the way starting in 2021. And we're going to show you the results of that and how we worded that question. Despite the agency's differing analysis, the updated reaffirmed an existing consensus between them that COVID-19 wasn't the result of a Chinese biological weapons program, the people who have read the classified report said. Well, right, because then you'd have to separate that out, and you'd have to separate that out, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm so glad that you don't hear that obnoxious noise anymore. There's work being done out there, and they cut off the electric, which turns on the big generator, and I was like, fingers crossed that would stop before the show, and thank God it did. All right, anyway, and now they're calling me, so I imagine they have a question, but Laura's going to have to handle it. All right. The bottom line is, did anyone ever really discuss this except for very early, being a Chinese bioweapon, right? Alone, right? So you could kind of classify it like that and let the NIH off the hook here if Fauci was lying under oath, right? So you can kind of let them off the hook if there was some kind of joint operation going on that was being funded, as Rand Paul and Dr. Fauci famously sparred over during a hearing. No, it is not gain-of-function research, right? So you could kind of let the Chinese off the hook here. If the U.S. actually had, say, a $37 million grant that they gave, that the Trump administration stopped to this laboratory, right? You could say, well, it wasn't a government-sponsored Chinese bioweapon. A senior U.S. intelligence official confirmed that the intelligence community had conducted an update whose existence hasn't previously been reported. This official added that it was done in light of new intelligence, further study of academic literature, and consultation with experts outside government. And from what I understand is that it is the new information is some of the academics and scientists out there directly contradicting something that Dr. Fauci had noted, and which was actually featured prominently in Glenn Kessler's fact check, which was not just that it didn't happen from a lab leak, folks, but that it wasn't possible for it to have happened via a lab leak. All right, so we can pretty much put this into bed for a second. Let's look at an email from Dr. Fauci before we go to Mr. Sullivan and rewind the tape to Donald Trump. So this is from Peter Daszak, right? Going back and forth to Tony, right? Anthony Fauci. Many thanks for your kind note. And Peter says, Tony, CCing David so that you might pass this on to Tony once he has a spare second. As the PI of the R1 grant publicly targeted by Fox News reporters at the presidential press conference briefing last night, I just wanted to say a personal thank you on behalf of our staff and collaborators. These people are supposed to be so smart. It's April 18th, by the way, 2020. And I'm going to show you the posture Fox News took toward Donald Trump and his administration, actually saying, no, actually, we do believe it came from a lab. And by the way, I'll give you exactly what the source of where they were getting that from. But it's not exactly like Fox News was going out on a limb here and, getting out of the consensus. They're supposed to be so smart, but they can't space out. Thank you. On behalf of our staff and collaborators, I just want to say a personal thank you on behalf of our staff and collaborators. Collaborators in what? Collaborators in this scheme to cover this origin story and smear and deplatform and remove and censor anyone who challenges it whatsoever. For publicly standing up and stating that the scientific evidence supports a natural origin for COVID-19 from a bat to human spillover, not a lab release from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, as we now know, there was a conglomerate of doctors who completely disagreed with that, could always challenge them and said, we would very much like you to put forward more than what you have put forward, because as of right now, you can say that the scientific evidence supports it, but there was never actually really scientific evidence to support it. So this was at the height of science says, without actually giving the science. It's just a team of collaborators forming a bogus consensus. Whether it turned out to be bogus or not is kind of irrelevant, because at that moment in time, they did not have the information, and in fact, had information that contradicted. Because I'm going to tell you right now, the intelligence that supported Donald Trump, a clip I'm about to run with Donald Trump right now, came from the Director of National Intelligence and the State Department. 2, not 1, but 2. And on both accounts, the media knew all about it. And they refused to report it. They just flatly refused to report it. All right, let's do this.
And my question is, have you seen anything at this point that gives you a high degree of confidence that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was the origin of this virus?
Yes, I have. And I think that the world Health Organization should be ashamed of themselves because they're like the public relations agency for China. And this country pays them almost $500 million a year, and China pays them $38 million a year. And whether it's a lot or more, it doesn't matter. It's still, they shouldn't be making excuses when people make horrible mistakes, especially mistakes that are causing hundreds of thousands of people around the world to die.
All right. Now, before we even get into this, let's listen to Jake Sullivan's response.
I want to ask about a new Wall Street Journal report.
It's not a response to Trump. It's a response to the Wall Street Journal report. I should have clarified.
I want to ask about a new Wall Street Journal report out this morning that a classified intelligence report from the Department of Energy concludes that the coronavirus pandemic most likely did not emerge naturally, but it did come from a laboratory leak. Did the coronavirus pandemic start in a lab? Is that what you believe now?
Well, Dana, there is a variety of views in the intelligence community. Some elements of the intelligence community have reached conclusions on one side, some on the other. A number of them have said they just don't have enough information to be sure. Here's what I can tell you. President Biden has directed repeatedly every element of our intelligence community to put effort and resources behind getting to the bottom of this question. And one of the things in that Wall Street Journal report, which I can't confirm or deny, but I will say the reference to the Department of Energy, President Biden specifically requested that the national labs, which are part of the Department of Energy, be brought into this assessment because he wants to put every tool at use to be able to figure out what happened here. And if we gain any further insider information, we will share it with Congress and we will share it with the American people. But right now, there is not a definitive answer that has emerged from the intelligence community on this question.
All right, this is important because the Department of Energy does, in fact, have, access, I would say, to different information about what the U.S. that ourselves could have been involved in. And they have access to people who know about these things. Whereas, if it's like the DNI or something, of course, they can get information, folks. But they're like, it's totally different. It's an intelligence perspective. Whereas this is more like an industry perspective. And I really, again, have to point out context here where if you believed or if you even stated that this was a possibility, that you were basically made to be a pariah in the industry, Dr. Malone, Peter McCullough, right? I mean, I could just go down the list. These people put their reputations on the line. They were directly, now we know, thank you, Matt Taibbi and others, we know that this Fauci and conspirator and company, in their own words, or collaborators, Fauci collaborator and company, they made this effort to hurt these people and to hurt people who pushed this as a potential, it wasn't even an alternative. I mean, the WHO, going to what Trump said, the WHO, and I want to get these crosstabs up, told a lot of fibs, folks, a lot of fibs about the nature of transmission of this disease, about how infectious it was. They really did cover quite a bit for the Chinese government. I mean, there's no other way to put it. And in Trump's mind, it's like, we give you so much more money than the Chinese. Why are you doing that? And that's a question that needs to be told, unless there's a lot more to the story than meets the eye. Like, are all of these agencies now admitting that this, in fact, is the likely origin of COVID, or, because there's nothing else to the story? Or are they trying to keep us focused on the shiny ball when something else, perhaps even, sadly more sinister? Folks, for those of you who don't believe that governments are capable of such evil deeds, I tell you to take the pacifier out of your mouth. All right. I mean, you're being a baby. Governments are evil. They have always been evil throughout the history of human civilization. For the most part, governments have not been a force of good. And the leading cause of unnatural human death in the 20th century was government. They kill. It's called democide. All right. So did Americans ever believe this is really interesting, right? So despite all of Fauci and collaborator and company's efforts, right, which includes the Glenn Kesslers of the world and the Jake Tappers of the world, and the what's her name over it? I can't even remember her name. I don't really care. Dana Bash or whatever her name is. Despite all of this and because people were removed for talking about this, we still ask people, and as early as like late spring 2021, the sentiment was overwhelming that this thing came from a lab in Wuhan. And I want to really pay attention to how we worded this question, okay? This is the public polling project dating back to 2021. Late spring, early summer was our national survey. It's a big survey, June 4th to June 7th. The summer solstice is not until June 21st. That's why I keep saying late spring. All right. Sampling error is low. Obviously, we did very well in the generic ballot with it. At this time, as you can see, by the way, this was pre-Russia, so it's worth pointing out. Look at how many more people viewed China as the threat than Russia. That has changed. Russia's now at like 32, I think, while China remains at 42 for the most part. But we asked people about the lab leak likelihood. And by the way, we did this after asking them. We had the vaccine tracker, vaccine status tracker, which included later boosters and everything. We didn't want to taint those questions. We asked this after. So understand this is still people who, admitted to, jumping out there, being among the first, in fact, to go and take that vaccine. We would ask about mandates at this time period. So there were still people who were, what's the word I'm looking for? COVID crazy, I guess. Is it, scared. Let's just call it scared. There were still people who were, in fact, very scared. And yet this is what they still believed, regardless of whether it was intentional or a leak. How likely do you think it is that SARS-CoV-2, the coronavirus that causes COVID-19, originated in a lab in Wuhan, China? Very likely 47.2%. Somewhat likely 22.6%. Ladies and gentlemen, 7 in 10 Americans as early as late spring 2021 thought this thing came from a lab in Wuhan. And they continued with this charade for years. Almost 2 years after this survey, we're now seeing this headline from the Wall Street Journal, even though there was information disseminated to the media from the DNI and from the State Department as early as still under then President Donald Trump's administration. And they just didn't believe it. They just chose not to talk about it. We did some shows on it. We discussed it. We discussed it at the time we released this poll result. They just didn't care. Very unlikely, 6.3%. Somewhat unlikely, 8.7%. Unsure, no opinion, roughly 15.2%. So is this an exemption from the rule of why people believe lies? The truth is, I might lean immediately toward no, it's not. The general thing that we see play out, whether it's Ferguson, hands up, don't shoot, or it's Kyle Rittenhouse, traveled with an automatic weapon across state lines to murder black protesters, or it's Russia collusion hoax, whatever it may be, the percentage of people, I bet you, who still believe this thing came from a wet market, I am almost willing to bet, and I'm not a gambling man, I bet you maybe it rose to 75, maybe it rose to 80, but there will still and forever will be people who believe, no matter how many more agencies come out and say it, people who believe that this thing did not come from a lab in Wuhan. Why? Because that's what their precious media told them. Interesting result here is if you look by education, right? It's supposed to be only the dumb people who would buy such a thing. Only those uneducated Trump voters would believe such a thing. It's basically 70% combined across the board. Doesn't matter what your education level is. 48.6% of those who have a high school degree or less said it was very likely, but 21.2% said somewhat likely. Go all the way to the other end of the spectrum because you're looking at what there, 69.8%, right? Go all the way to the other side of the spectrum, and we have those who have a graduate or advanced degree. 46.3% of them said very likely, but 23.1% said at least somewhat likely, bringing it to a grand total, of course, of 69.4%. 0.4 of a percentage point different than those who don't have any college whatsoever. Some college associates, 55.6, very likely, 23.6, somewhat likely, bringing it to a grand total of 69.2%. So again, rounding up everywhere here, we're looking at 7 and 10. Undergrad, 48.3, very likely, 22.4, somewhat likely, the highest of any category at 70.7%. All within the sampling error of 2.1. Subgroup errors are higher, so they are basically identical. It doesn't matter what your level of education was. You didn't buy the media's story for a second. 4 Pinocchios Glenn Kessler gave. 4 Pinocchios. And when Ted Cruz went to say something about it, he implied that Ted Cruz is too stupid to understand the scientific debate that they had in their little video. That scientific debate made it clear that it was impossible. Not only isn't it likely, it's impossible. Looking by party is also pretty interesting. If we look by party, and I listen, if I cared enough about it, if I cared enough about it, I really would show you. It's virtually impossible, is what Glenn Kessler said. And in fact, you know what? I'll go back to the crosstab. Well, let's look at the party first. Then I'll show you what Glenn Kessler said. Okay. By party, you can see that Republicans and independents are, without a doubt, much more likely to say very likely and somewhat likely combined, right? You have 65.7% of independents and third-party voters who said it was likely. And of course, you have almost near universal. I mean, it's very close. It's in the 80s, almost 90% of Republicans who said that's what happened. And you have 60% almost of Democrats. So a big difference there. But by education, it's not. Only by party. That's why I tell you that it is, and here, let's look by ideology one more time before I make my point. Look at that. Conservative, 2/3, very likely. Compare that to liberals, less than half, 30%. So this is why I tell you that no, it is not an exception to the rule, because no matter what, when you have this divide, those people who are going to always believe that this thing came from a bat at a wet market or some kind of like disgusting poison soup, they're doing it out of partisan fervor, not out of the facts, not out of what is true, but because they believe MSNBC, because they believe CNN. It would take a while to unravel this lie, even if the media admits that they were wrong. The truth is, unfortunately, it's like collateral damage. Media propaganda is like collateral damage. Once the shell's in the air, it's going to do some damage. It doesn't matter how much you clean up after or how much humanitarian aid you offer, the damage to that neighborhood is done. The casualty count is the casualty count. And while, you may be able to mend some people, lend them assistance, they're always going to have been injured by that false information. And those who are just like KIA, they're lost. They're always going to believe it. And if you say it was a lab leak, they'll call you a Trumper. Because as you can see here, it has nothing to do with the fact pattern. The fact pattern is clear. And that's why by education, there's no difference. It's by partisanship, because that's what's informing them. And that's friggin' sad. And especially when you have something like the Democratic hive mind, it's just hard to pierce that because it doesn't go little by little, folks. That's not, it's nature anyway. People tend to believe things in waves together. They uniform belief systems. That's the hive mind. And that's that side of this, of this divide. If one believes it, chances are most of them are going to believe it. So it would take an enormous amount of uneffing to get their mind right on something like this. It's why you can't tell somebody that Michael Brown didn't have his hands up. He didn't say don't shoot. What he did do was try to take the firearm off of a white police officer, and he paid the price because the police officer had to defend himself. It doesn't matter that the grand jurors were African American who let Officer Darren Wilson off. That doesn't matter. Is partisanship, is informing their belief systems, are informing their opinions. And once the media feeds that, it's incredibly difficult to change it. And that's sad. And the media should know that they have that kind, of power, even though people don't trust them anymore. They still have that kind of influence, especially even if you're just looking at certain groups of people. The Mr. Rogers mindset. And frankly, I'm going to have to come up with a different phrase for that, folks, because it's unfair to Mr. Rogers, who was, by the way, a staunch Republican, in case people don't know that. Mr. Rogers was a Republican through and through. So maybe I'm unfair to him by even bringing this up. All right. Before we get to move on to the other thing, I really do think it's important to show you the level of dishonesty here. So let's kill that. Let's get Glenn Kessler's response to Ted Cruz. All right. So first of all, let's go back and let's see how Ted Cruz does this first and foremost. All right. So Ted Cruz says, watch this amazing video. Was coronavirus accidentally released from the Wuhan lab? It's doubtful. And I'm not going to go to the YouTube video and click on it. Okay. If you want to do it in your own time, you should do that. But at this point, I'm not even going to give them clicks, and I'm not going to give them anything. All right. This is, at this point, a crime. It's the level of dishonesty is criminal. At the time that the Washington Post pushed this video, they knew what the State Department was disseminating. They knew what the DNI was disseminating, and they just simply chose to ignore it and help Dr. Fauci make you think something that's not true. All right? So Ted Cruz says, amazing, in quotes, is definitely right word for this video. WAPO is, quote, abandoning all pretenses of journalism to produce CCP propaganda, unquote, would be another way to put it. If this reporter submitted this video in a freshman logic class, it wouldn't receive a passing grade. Let's review the facts. And he goes on. 2. Fact 1. WAPO admits 2 separate labs in Wuhan were studying coronaviruses derived from bats. One lab was just 300 yards from the Wuhan wet market. Fact 2. Washington Post admits bats with similar coronaviruses, quote, live in caves 1,000 miles away, unquote. Don't forget we did have a whistleblower through all this who was on Tucker Carlson. She was removed from Twitter. She worked in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Remember her? Fact 3, Washington Post admits both labs had serious safety concerns, resulting in multiple U.S. Department wires before this crisis, warning that shoddy safety protocols could lead to a global coronavirus pandemic. Fact 4, Washington Post admits China destroyed the lab samples after the pandemic started, raising the natural inference that they were afraid what the samples, if examined, would show. All of these facts strongly suggest the virus escaped from one of these CCP labs. At this point, the evidence is circumstantial because the CCP is hiding, blocking any direct evidence. But what is WAPO's conclusion? Unquote. And this is why, by the way, yes, while it's true those samples were gone, the reason for the State Department assessment under the Trump administration, backed by DNI, because of course there was some joint stuff there, is based on testimony, what they were told, firsthand accounts from, by the way, that whistleblower and apparently others saying this is what happened. And they ignored that. Again, believe me, the Washington Post knew of this information when they did this. So did Fox News. So did the New York Times. So did CNN. So did MSNBC. Folks, at the latter part of the Trump administration, they were trying to give this stuff out like it was candy on Halloween. Media was not interested. Conclusion? The balance of scientific evidence strongly suggests a conclusion that the new coronavirus emerged from nature, be it in the Wuhan market or somewhere else. And that's their quote. This is a non sequitur. None of the aforementioned evidence leads to that conclusion. This is one of the biggest problems they always had with this. They never really provided any direct evidence. They would make up the non sequitur is the correct label. It is. What's Washington Post's basis? They counterfact one. The CCP and the lab director who initially wrote, could have come from our lab, now deny it. Her team and the Chinese government had adamantly denied that it could have come from this lab. The Washington Post takes that denial as true. So even though they initially said something else, the Washington Post ignores that and just trusts the CCP reversing itself. For my ufologists out there, it's like, the Army Air Force is in possession of an alien spacecraft that crashed on what's his name's farm in 1947. A day later, no, it was a weather balloon. Like, come on. Max Braswell. Anyway, Washington Post counterfact 2. They quote Dr. Peter Daszak, the head of who I just read you an email from, the head of the EcoHealth Alliance, as saying, quote, China's been incredibly open. I believe it's because it's a scientific collaboration, and in China, they're really proud of their science. They do good work, especially in biology. Yeah, you'd know that, wouldn't you, Peter? And Anthony, Tony, you'd know that, wouldn't you? Because obviously, your buddy Tony was not being truthful under oath. Collaborators. Let's refresh that term here. Collaborators. Glenn Kessler is apparently one of their collaborators. That's it. Those two counterfacts from the 100% of the basis for Washington Post fact check. That is it. Those two counterfacts are the entire justification for the fact check. And 2, the claim that, quote, China's been incredibly open is laughably absurd. They destroyed the lab samples. They punished and silenced the pandemic whistleblowers. And by the way, they did not allow Americans in there at the time. For Fauci to say that is incredible. They did not allow people to come independently and review stuff from the United States. They did not. It was the topic of countless, or at least it was brought up during part of the countless daily, nightly press conferences that the Trump White House had. And who is this objective? A source, Dr. Daszak. Well, his organization, the EcoHealth Alliance, was receiving, now canceled, U.S. taxpayer money to support bat coronavirus research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which Trump canceled, by the way. This is the subject that Emerald Robinson, formerly of Newsmax at the time, when she was the White House correspondent for Newsmax, that's what she was talking about. Why does WAPO not disclose his enormous bias, litigation exposure, and a conflict of interest? 10, and it is relevant that Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world who stands to make billions in China if he pleases the communist overlords. Whatever WAPO is doing, this is not journalism. It is apologizing for the CCP, trying to cover up their culpability. And let's go back here, because this is what Glenn Kessler was saying in response. I fear, this is like yuppie white man talk. I fear Ted Cruz missed the scientific animation in the video that shows how it is virtually impossible for this virus jump from the lab. Virtually impossible, he states. And when a white yuppie liberal says, I fear, it's like a Southerner saying, bless your little heart. What he's saying is, Ted Cruz is too stupid to understand the point of our cool little video. Even though Alan Dershowitz has said on numerous occasions that when Ted Cruz was his student, he was one of the most brilliant legal minds he ever taught. But he's an idiot, and he can't understand an animation. Oh, he's a lawyer, and he's looking at the fact pattern here. Or the many interviews with actual scientists. Again, he's not addressing the criticism that not only Ted Cruz, but countless of us laid out at the time. These scientists have enormous conflicts of interests. They also have very long histories of lying. He stands to make money from this stuff. He may, in fact, have some criminal liability if this thing goes sideways on him. Certainly civil. We deal in facts, he says, and viewers can judge for themselves. Where is your apology? Where is your correction or flat out retraction? I know. Good luck with that, Laura said. Good luck with that. This is why they're so dangerous. This is why they are, let me put it this way. It is hard to find a more negative, toxic entity, contribution, whatever you want to call it, to American society and our polity than the corporate news. They are the most divisive, disingenuous, disinformation pushers in our society. There is no amount of damage that an alternative website or organization like Project Veritas, you can add them all up and combined, Gateway Pundits, whatever you want to throw in there, combined, they will never come close to the amount of disinformation that has been pumped into the polity from these people. And the biggies, the big ones, come from them. They don't deal in facts at all, Morgan. Right. This idea that he didn't answer a single criticism from Ted Cruz, who, like a lawyer, laid down the argument. Like a prosecutor, in fact. Laid it down. He's certainly not a defense. In this case, Glenn Kessler is acting as if he's like the defense attorney for CCP and the WHO, who, by the way, is not really referenced in there, but he is the defending attorney, the defense team for the CCP in this exchange. And you have Ted Cruz laying out in solid, logical order a fact pattern that, while even he says is circumstantial, all points to the same conclusion. By the way, people have been, in fact, convicted on circumstantial evidence, of course. And he doesn't respond to a single thing. Not a single thing. Just a dig that I fear this is the social bias that they rely on, that they've been relying on in truth since they decided they needed to implement a social desirability bias campaign against Donald Trump and the MAGA movement after Trump beat Clinton. They were worried they lost control of information, so there had to be a way that they frame this stuff now. And they don't actually have to answer, in a factual argument. They don't actually have to make that. What they have to do is make the person who's questioning them look stupid, or not even, but just portray them, characterize them as simple, backward, even indecent. And then that tarnishes everyone who may agree with them as such. Oh, you agree with that Ted Cruz guy? I fear you're just as dumb as he is. I fear you may not be smart enough to comprehend our animation. Didn't you see our animation? You weren't convinced by our animation? And by the way, those are real scientists. He doesn't actually have to answer anything that Cruz brought up about those scientists. Those are scientists. Don't you believe in science? Oh, you're backward, man. I'm sorry you don't believe in science. then you're stupid. You're a stupid person. And now we have to look down on you with pity. And you're not coming to our Tupperware party next Tuesday, 7. No tea and crumpets for you. Sorry, you're a pariah. And who does this work on, by the way? I'm going to tell you right now. White, educated, suburban women. Oh, Laura, it's a good thing I didn't have that on figure 8. It's a good thing the mic is set to cardioid. And, it's trying to pick up sound just from here. Let's not... Laura, you're funny as hell. But I'm kind of hoping they didn't hear that. But she's right. They are the most susceptible to it. We know it. We know they are because for years we have been asking these social desirability questions. In fact, and I'm going to pop this up. Let's get rid of old Glenn. Let's remove Glenn. And let's look at the crosstab again. And I think they are in this crosstab. Before I pop it up, though, let me just make sure. You know what, though? Even if it's not in that, we could, these social, I don't want to save it because I don't want it to only go to that. So hold on, guys. Let me go back to all so anyone who looks at the crosstab sees the whole crosstab. Save it. All right. So basically, asking people those what we call comfortable sharing political beliefs are social desirability bias indicators. And there are repeatedly the same groups who are afraid to look stupid, who are afraid to share their true opinions. And that would be the white suburban woman, and there are others, but I think, and it's just, again, experience is informing this opinion, but also the data that we've collected based on who these people actually vote for. Young, non-white men, working men. So if you are a black male, let's say 18 to 35 or even 45, let's go 18 to 45, because if you've been with me a while, you may remember this. We took Pennsylvania and we showed you this with the bias indicators and then overlapped them with who they intended to vote for. And you could very clearly see it. There's young black and Hispanic men who, I think it's less in the Hispanic side, though. I don't think it is less. Young black men are definitely the most afraid to admit if they have differing political beliefs or have differing, views on stuff like this. And that's because they could be ridiculed by older generations in their family. So socially, it's very difficult for them to admit that they're not going to be part of that machine that their prior generations have been a part of. And I think, by the way, viewers out there, and young black men watching, I think you know what I'm talking about, right? So it's very hard to explain to your auntie that you're voting for Donald Trump, right? They will destroy. And Laura, do you remember that? I say a kid because I'm 41, but he wasn't a kid. He was 23 years old. And it was in North Carolina. And as he voted early in person. And as he came out, it was berated. I'll never forget this, berated by Spectrum News. And we talked to him and he was like, I can't be seen on TV. They asked him, who'd you vote for? And he was terrified. Do you remember this kid, Laura? Terrified. And later on, I'm like, hey, man, what's the deal? He's like, oh my God, if my mother and my aunt saw this segment tonight, and he's like, I voted for Donald Trump. And if they found out about it, I'm out of the family, man. I'm out of the family. No more Sunday dinners for me. Like, that's it. So they're different, though. They fear that because that's part of voting heritage. White suburban women, educated white suburban women, fear each other. They made them afraid of each other. It's like, oh my God, you're gonna vote for Donald Trump? Oh, what's wrong with you? She's not coming to the potluck next week. Can you bring my kid to dance class for me? It's all filled, but the van's all full this week. I'm sorry, Trump voter. They're afraid of each other, and that's what they've done. So it's very different experience, but the same groups keep popping up. And that's what Glenn Kessler is doing right there. He's not refuting any facts. He's not refuting any points that Cruz is making. He's trying to make Cruz look stupid. Too stupid to understand his animation graphic. And then again points to these very credentialed scientists. But being credentialed is not being credible. They're two different things. These same credentialed scientists told us, because Purdue Pharma bought them, told us that OxyContin was completely safe, that there was a difference between drug-seeking behavior and addiction. And of course, that's just a very well-known example, but I could go on and on and on and on. All right, so, I mean, this is, I'm looking at some of the comments, and you guys know what I'm talking about. Family, friends, they did this. They did this to us because they can't win an argument based on the facts, so they had to do this to us, and that they are the most negative force. I challenge you all listening to find another entity, another person, another whatever, that is providing a more negative contribution to society than corporate media. You will not find one. I guarantee you. Duke Lacrosse, Tawana Brawley, they want us to hate each other. They want us to be afraid of each other. They want us to believe these lies that they tell us. There is no, and somebody is saying that for some Asians, that's the same thing. What that young black voter had to deal with. And again, I say kid, but I mean, he was like 20-something years old, Laura, right? 23, 24 years old. Low 20s, mid 20s. I don't remember exactly, but I mean, terrified. It's sad. They create these divisions, they create these hoaxes, and sadly, they perpetuate these myths. And again, book club, last one with Jack Snyder, Myths of Empire. Would have, if for those of you who don't join the book club, just give you an idea of, he gets into this a lot, and it's very relevant to right now what we're talking about. Some societies are myth-believing societies. And I argued myself once upon a time that those are the most dangerous. So forget about the democratic peace theory. If we were all just democracies, we wouldn't kill each other. That's bullcrap, and not at all supported by the evidence, by the historical record. In fact, if democracies are myth-believing societies, they are the most dangerous. More dangerous than a dictator, more dangerous than a cartelized system. They are extremely dangerous. Why? Because they can justify never-ending war and never-ending overexpansion through BS terms of morality. Some bogus moralism argument. It can't ever be wrong for us to be the aggressor because we're the good guys. So aggression from us is a good thing. Every single nation who was an aggressor, great power, I would say, believed they were better. They believed they were morally right. The Germans in World War II still believed that they were right. So conquering Austria and Poland and all these, none of that was wrong. So you're actually much, much, much more dangerous by being a myth-believing society. And in the beginning, Germans were not that much of a myth-believing society, crushing them after World War I and turning them into a poverty state. Wheelbarrows of cash needed to buy a loaf of bread made them a myth-believing society, or made them susceptible to people like Hitler, who, look, when everyone's telling you that you're bad, and you have great pride in yourself and your race and your heritage and your nation, your nationalism, and everyone's telling you that you're basically the devil, who caused mass casualties of some ungodly, never seen before number. When someone comes around and tells you that, no, in fact, you're not inferior. You're superior. They just beat you down because they're afraid of you, because they know you're superior. It's an appealing argument, isn't it? It certainly is. When you are basically the bottom of everyone's heel. So, all right, 12:57. Should I get into the next segment? No. Let's do the reads, and then we'll get into the next segment. And I don't think I'm going to have to come back to the crosstabs, but and keep that in mind. And I'm in no way justifying the Germans, ladies and gentlemen, but I want you to consider this when we go into the next segment, which is about Ukraine. And once again, how we talk about why people believe lies. Why do they believe these myths? War propaganda is among the most potent propaganda out there. It appears public health propaganda can give a serious run to the military-industrial complex, can give them a serious run for their money, but still, initially, the war drum is difficult not to march to. Very difficult. Even if it becomes later the worst sound in the world that people don't want to hear, and they're just like, enough with the racket. In the beginning, that propaganda is strong. All right. We're gonna we'll talk about that when we come back in this next from this next segment. But first, a word from our sponsors. First up, Field of Green. How many of you have been like Laura and I? You basically try all these different things. The fact of the matter is, you need 5 healthy servings of fruit and vegetables a day. But who the hell can do that? Am I right or am I wrong? Junk science. That's what the doctor called many of those other fruit and vegetable supplements that we tried. Junk science, because they use extracts of common produce department fruits and vegetables that have very few health benefits. I take Field of Greens because it's the whole organic fruit and vegetable, not a watered down supplement, and it's backed by a better health promise. Each ingredient in Field of Greens was scientifically chosen to support vital organs like heart, lungs, and kidney health. Others support my immune system, blood pressure, metabolism, and pretty important for a 41-year-old man anyway, healthy weight loss. I don't eat as healthy as I should, although I'd love to. I try. That's why I take Field of Greens. Like me, you'll probably look and feel healthier fast. Everyone's experience is different. You have way more energy, but your best proof, the real proof, will be at your next checkup when your doctor says, whatever you're doing, it's working. Keep it up. Let's get started with 15% off today. Go to fieldofgreens.com. Use the promo code TPP for the People's Pundit. That's fieldofgreens.com. Use the promo code TPP to get 15% off today. Now, I'll tell you this, folks. Don't let it run out. Don't let it lapse, because you will be looking for it. Not making that mistake again. All right. And so our friends at Jam and Bean, all right, they're run by patriots, but also artists. All right. I know a thing or two about coffee roasting. Very fortunate when I was young to have somebody expose me to that. And the guy was magnificent. He was an artist, and they are far and few between. The guys at Jam and Bean are amazing, and their coffee is a work of art. If you're somebody like me, you like both. Sometimes you want to sit back, you want to relax, and you want to grind the beans up, do it yourself, put it in a French press, whatever it is that your preference. Or if you're also like me, because I do both, where I need convenience, and you're looking for a full-bodied K-Pod, which you just really cannot buy at the supermarket, then Jam and Bean's it. All right. Again, same promo code TPP for the People's Pundit. That's jamandbean.com, JAMN as in Nancy, bean.com. By the way, while you're there, check out their absolutely delicious popcorn. So good, affordable, and everything natural. Word on the K-Pods, by the way, people don't believe me when I tell them this, but it is true. In fact, it is true. I researched it. If you try to buy a medium-bodied K-Pod in the store, it's not really a medium roast. It, in fact, has some disgusting, most of them, Starbucks definitely, have these disgusting wafers in there to, like, take up space in the K-Pod, and then they just use a lot, like, less roasted and less of it, dark roast. Because without getting into the weeds, it's difficult to make a true medium body. It's not impossible, but it's expensive. And Jam and Bean did it, and they figured out a way to bring it to people with a cost that actually people can bear, right? So it is delicious. Medium body. If I'm going to have a medium body, a medium roast, it better be full body, and jam and beans delicious. Again, same promo code TPP for the People's Pundit. All right. There's something I want to show you real quick. This was, in fact, in the New York Times as well. Now we're talking about this. Coming up on the anniversary of the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, whatever you want to call it, whatever side you're on. If you are pro-Ukraine, it's an invasion of eastern Ukraine. If you are on the Russian side of this, it is a liberation of ethnic Russian areas. All right, we're going to get into this. The fact of the matter is, we're coming up on a year. The Biden administration wants Ukraine to basically wage an all-out offensive to take back Crimea. All right. Even in fact, parts of the Donbass. This would apparently, and it's, I've been saying this, Putin is not fighting. Joe Kemp, having him on was great to talk about this because he gets it. Putin is not fighting at total war level or great power capacity. He's not doing that. He's being very, whether you want to admit this or not, it's just true. He's being very measured in what he can do. If they attack Crimea and the Donbass, Putin will defend it, and it will be a level of fighting we have not yet seen. Even if the Ukrainians win it, or not win it, but carry the battle, take control temporarily, they cannot hold it. And why? Because, first of all, there's a domestic population there that doesn't want to be part of Ukraine. Very simple. Same thing with Eastern Ukraine. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I trust her. She knows the region. She has family there. Like I trust Todd Wood, who is more knowledgeable on the region than anybody I've ever seen working at the New York Times or the Washington Post. He's been on Tucker quite a bit, so anytime he is, you should definitely catch him on Tucker Carlson. He is, of course, the editor and founder of CD Media. In the Donbass, Eastern Ukraine, all the way to Crimea, they will run into resistance, even if they were to capture it back from Russia. The domestic population, as she told me, they won't let it happen. At least not. Maybe it would be a very temporary win, but that they won't let it happen. They'll fight to the death because they know what's in store for them if Ukraine is in fact in charge. It will be worse, she believes, than it was before, which is really saying something. All right. So that, and Ukraine has mobilized far more of what their total capacity is than Russia has. So it would be, just a matter of numbers, folks. It would be hard for Ukraine to commit the amount of men, the amount of troops, men, women, children, necessary to be able to combat what Putin would then mobilize to take it back. The fact is, Russia has more potential power. It's a larger population. It has more resources, etc. Now, it is true that since 2014, the Ukrainian army has been strengthened by Western countries, by NATO and the U.S., the freaking U.S. Let's just call it what it is. The U.S. is NATO. Nobody else is a threat to anybody or anything. All right. And by the way, again, really great. The book club yesterday, we were talking about why is the U.S. doing this? Well, if you were with us talking about offshore balancers and what hegemons, which we are a hegemon, what hegemons do to try to thwart other potential hegemons or great powers in other regions. The main problem the U.S. obviously has is that Russia really is part of two great power regions. It's Europe and it's Asia, Northeast Asia specifically. So we can't rely on other great powers in the region, which is called buck passing, to deal with the threat, which we would do and have done for many, many years and many, many instances when it had been possible. But in this case, it's not possible. And if you're an offensive realist, you would say this was extremely predictable. It's the wrong move, but it's extremely predictable. This is what the U.S. would do. You cannot look to Japan. We neutered them. You cannot look to it, and that's just the Asian region. You can't look to any of the allies in the West. They're weak. Great Britain is the strongest, but it still is weak. Germany has the potential to be the strongest NATO ally, but we've cut their you-know-what off. Even though Trump, and, during the book club, one of them said, one of the members said, I don't even feel bad for Germany, because at least for Germany under Donald Trump, he encouraged it. Build up, defend yourself. You could be an enormously powerful nation state, and you have a lot more to say in the international system. They didn't do it. They're too busy letting in refugees and pushing social safety nets. That's what they want to spend their money on. So because we don't have, being an insular, meaning covered around by water, we have no real threat to our border, offshore great power and a hegemon, we have to do this ourselves. That's the way they feed. That's the way nation states act, according to this. And I am a subscriber of offensive realism. I'm not a defensive realist. I think they make the case of what the world should be like if they were smart. Defensive realists are, this is how nation states should behave, because this is the smart thing. So it doesn't really make any sense for them to behave otherwise. Well, the truth is, and then they try to say, to explain it away, there are good expansionists and there are bad expansionists. The good ones are those who know when to put the brakes on expanding. The bad ones are the ones who overexpand and ultimately collapse. And, the cost becomes too great. Right? And offensive realists say that's bullcrap. You can't pick and choose when you want to. And ironically, the United Kingdom and the United States are always their go-to when we are, like, as John Mearsheimer says, we are the poster child for offensive realism. If you look at our history. And in this case, there's just nobody else that we could pass the buck to, so we're doing it. Why are we doing it? Because we are attempting to thwart Russia. That's it. It's that simple. We're afraid of them. And the sad thing is, and offensive realism, defensive realism agree with this, this is where you make mistakes and you create coalitions that balance against you. We cannot look to Asia because we have pushed them. We have pushed the other great power in the region is China, and we have pushed them into the arms of Russia. And this is incredibly stupid. It's folly one. It's like INR stupidity 101. But they don't care, and they're going to keep going. Hat tip, Aaron Mate. I'm going to pull this up. It's an article from the New York Times. It definitely boosts Mr. Mearsheimer's argument, because very clearly, and this is some of this even coming from General Mark Milley, for crying out loud, the situation and the outlook for Ukraine is, and always was, dire. Even the initial suggestion was enter into peace talks. And the Biden administration simply did not want to do it. They tabled it, even though that was the advice of their military advisors. Sit at the table. Not only did they not do it, but this assessment has been the assessment since damn near the start of this thing. And so while Zelensky, at the times, during times when Zelensky was like, you know what, I think I'm ready to talk. This was the assessment of the U.S. Joint Chiefs, the Joint Chiefs staff. And yet, Biden didn't say, okay, let's negotiate this thing. Let's go for a peace deal. They said, you don't dare sit down with him and talk peace, even though they knew the situation was dire for Ukraine. Just like now, even though they know the amount of lives that the Ukrainian people are going to lose if they try to take back Crimea or even wage an offensive in the Donbass, the cost in blood is going to be enormous. They don't give a damn. They don't care. They're using Ukraine to try to, quote, bloodlet Russia. And that is when you try to provoke another great power into a conflict, and it's prolonged, and you bleed them dry. You bleed their resources dry. All right, so this is definitely the U.S. attempting to bloodlet China, even though we are the aggressors. All right, I'd love to say it was bait and bleed, which means it's a lot like bloodletting, only you actually had to have had this all planned out, like it's some 4D chess master thing. We're too stupid for that. So it's bloodletting. Here we go. Hat tip, Aaron Mate again. Let me just get a quick drink of water, too, after an hour and 10 minutes of speaking. The New York Times is reporting on the assessment here. All right. And the assessment was not good. The assessment was, despite early successes by Ukraine in repelling some of the invading Russian forces, even scoring victories to recapture some of this territory, that was the result of Putin's strategic pullbacks, not the result of the Ukrainian army actually scoring decisive victories over the Russians. And the fact of the matter is, the Russians haven't put their best foot forward yet at all. So this is a bad outlook for Ukraine's effort. What you should do is get them around a table now while there's still leverage and basically save the state of Ukraine before it becomes a fourth of its size or worse, right? But pro-negotiation efforts in Western governments have gained little traction. It's not just the U.S., by the way. After progressive Democrats released a public letter in late October calling on President Biden to, quote, or to seek a, quote, rapid end to the conflict, unquote, the group's leader quickly retracted it. Talk about hive mind, right? Being scared. Around the same time, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark A. Milley, argued in internal meetings that Ukraine was unlikely to make substantially greater battlefield gains and should move to the bargaining table. The White House quickly squelched such talk. So, again, remember that there are actual lives at stake. You know, because I am by trade a public pollster, I try, obviously, to do my best to stay or to like voice America's opinion instead of my own. So like in the beginning, when I'm advocating against lethal aid to Ukraine, it's because the result of the poll said majority of Americans did not want to do this if it meant engaging Russia or potentially starting a conflict with Russia. I'm trying to advocate on behalf of the American public. But when it comes to war and the balance of power, I am a father before I'm a pollster. I was a soldier once. And I just can't keep my own views locked away. I feel like it's immoral to do it. This is a callous disregard for human life. The truth is, they parade around with their stupid little flags and their Twitter handles. They don't give a damn about the Ukrainian people. They don't give a damn how many men, women, and children are killed for their money laundering operation. They don't care. They want to rape and pillage this country, pick its bones, pick it down to the carcass like a bunch of scumbag vultures that they are. I'm not going to show the pictures of the Madonna again. I'm not going to do it. They don't care about Ukraine's behavior over the 8 years from 2014 to 2022. All they care about is the skim. It's like the mob in Las Vegas, but before they got shut down. It's about the skim. They want to skim off the top. And by the way, you're funding it. Who are they really skimming? Who are they robbing? They're robbing you. And then once you commit that money to the benefit of the Ukrainian people, and Todd Wood, again, has done fabulous reporting on this, them skimming the aid is then robbing the very people they tell you should be opening your wallets for, because you should be protecting them and you should be caring about them. Humanity, folks. The human condition, folks. Don't you care? Aren't you decent? Put some more money in the bucket. It's all so disgusting. It's all so dirty. Honestly, I don't see a good end to this. At this point, everyone was foolishly cheering on the attack on the Russian surveillance plane that was grounded in an airfield in Belarus. It's days after the president said, I won't enter this conflict unless Ukrainians start firing over the border. I think Zelensky did this on purpose. I think he was probably told to do it. I can't believe Putin hasn't retaliated for that and hasn't retaliated for Nord Stream 2. Not at the level that he could go out to the international community, to the UN, to the Security Council, and he could honestly argue he would be justified to do. As far as he knows, the U.S. does not have an open declaration of war against him. So why they would be doing this, according to international law, I mean, he could go to the UN and make that argument. I'm within my right now to bomb NATO bases. Stupid. Incredibly stupid. And I see a lot of you in there talking about the chemical and biological weapon programs that, of course, Victoria Nuland said existed. Then they denied existed, even though it's on the website. It's on the DOD's website. The State Department has it too. It's just mind-boggling. It's very, very much like it came from a bat in a wet market. It's that same thing. Even though it's like right there in front of your face, they're just telling you something else. And sadly, like no matter what, 15% to 20% are going to believe them no matter what, forever. Almost forever. And I'm trying to like walk the line here, be a little bit careful. But I do think that it is possible that, and this is why you should really have different sources than just Western media, because Putin has been talking about this for a while, and he's been making statements like the United States and NATO don't want Russia to control Ukraine because they don't want Russia to take control of certain facilities and expose all of their dirty little secrets. I have no doubt there's truth to that because governments do that. The United States, the Chinese, the Russians. In fact, the United States pretending as if that's not a possibility is highly skeptical, highly suspect to me, because we do that. We do it ever. I mean, and again, it's on the DOD's website. They're touting how they've actually reduced the number of these facilities. And they're jointly operated facilities. These aren't Ukraine owned and operated. All right. So what does this mean? Again, let me pop it up real quick. It means that the Biden White House has what is essentially a no peace talk policy. They have the policy of no peace. There will never be, at this time anyway, an attempt to negotiate a peace because they don't want peace. They want escalation and expansion. Does this sound at all familiar to you? It should, because last week we showed you the report to the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, then headed up by who? Joseph R. Biden, submitted by Tony Blinken, who is now the nation's top diplomat, making very much the same case. The no peace talk case regarding Saddam Hussein. It's the same playbook. And I brought this up last week, but I want to share this again. And don't pull that down, Laura, because I don't want to vape on air, okay? True dat, true dat. I want you guys to marinate on this for a second. Currently, Joe Biden is the president of the United States. And that says a lot, all right? The cabinet, when it comes to foreign affairs, the State Department and the Defense Department have been at odds, especially under the second Bush administration, George W. Bush. The State Department really began to lose the struggle over the balance of power for the president, right? For the presidency here. And they have been long fighting over control of foreign policy. Years ago, go think back to like John Foster Dulles and others. The State Department was way ahead of the battle, right? With the newly formed Department of Defense. There was a War Department before that, blah, blah, blah. The State Department was the predominant department bureaucracy that dealt with, and of course you have the secretary heading it all up, that was in charge of U.S. foreign policy. The most influence, however you want to put it. And over the years, from Eisenhower on down, right? Eisenhower warned us this would happen, and it did. The Department of Defense had been chipping away at the Department of State and their influence over foreign policy. And then comes the George W. Bush administration, and Donald Rumsfeld just not only wins the battle finally, but just KOs the State Department. And he gets full control over U.S. foreign policy. Basically, that is what happened. Now Obama comes along. It's a little bit of a back and forth. Whether you like her or not, you can't take it away from her. Hillary Clinton is a very strong figure. She's not going to be rolled. She's going to decide what happens with Libya, right? So she did wrestle some power back from the Defense Department, but unfortunately, she didn't really want to fight with them. She didn't. She didn't want a big fight with her friend Leon Panetta. She didn't want a big fight even with the holdover, right? The Bob Gates, Secretary Gates. They never really wanted to fight with these people because they're all like cut from the same cloth, right? So there wasn't much disagreement during that time period over what should be done. What about Libya? Oh, let Hillary have Libya. What's going on in Iraq? Well, we're pretty much all on the same page. In fact, after Joe Biden went over to China, was running point for U.S.-Chinese relations for Barack Obama, who was basically just trying to get rid of him because he thinks Joe Biden's an idiot. He goes over there with this very strict instructions. Be firm on the South China Sea. When it comes to these islands, you have to be firm. And Joe, even the Washington Post at the time wrote, what the hell was Joe Biden doing? He basically just went over there and bent over. Didn't deliver the demands, wasn't as firm as he was told to be, and now we know why. Because the Biden family is knee-deep in Chinese corruption. We know this. It's over. This is how the Chinese operate. They get at your family, they enrich your family to make sure that you are in their pocket. It's textbook. What they did to the Biden family through Jim and Hunter is textbook China. That's how they play. So he has to send Hillary over there to reaffirm his message. And Hillary steps in front of the microphone and says point blank that the South Chinese Sea, the islands, the resources in the South China Sea is vital to the security interests of the United States. Anytime a State Department figure or a Defense Department figure says that, it means you are willing to go to war. If it's a vital national security interest, you are willing to fight. That's the signal it sends to other nations when you make those comments. But it had to come from Hillary. Nevertheless, the Department of Defense still maintained most of that power over foreign policy. Fast forward to now, all right? And there was some stuff in the Trump administration, but Tillis was an idiot. Then what? Pompeo was supposed to square things away? Mr. CIA? I mean, this was some of the stuff that really did Trump dirty. And not only Trump, but his agenda, his supporters. It's these terrible choices in personnel. Literally ignoring him. You have Mad Dog Mattis, who hates that name, so I try to make it a point of saying it at every turn. Mad Dog Mattis ignoring his orders in Syria, ignoring his orders in Afghanistan, constantly fighting with him. And of course, the National Security Council was like an anti-Trump activist group at this point. So, needless to say, Trump never really did anything to wrestle power away from the Department of Defense. Now here we are. All right. And this, I'm telling you this history because you have to understand it in order to understand why what I'm saying right now is not I'm not being hyperbolic. This is not hyperbole. It's dangerous. Where we are right now is we're in danger. We have a Secretary of Defense who not only is the biggest loser in modern warfare. I mean, this guy, everything he's been involved in has been a failure. And of course, I'm talking about General Austin, who is now Secretary Austin. He is a loser of the highest order. And yet, this is what happens in DC. You get rewarded for not even mediocrity. Even if you're bad at your job, you're rewarded. See Alyssa Slotkin, no different. Kept getting promoted, then ran for Congress using her national security background, even though everything she touched turned to everything. Iraq, failure. Multiple assignments. Every single one of them, their mission failed. Austin, no better, but he's even worse because the current Secretary of Defense doesn't even believe in civilian control over the military. Folks, this is like a bedrock American principle. That would scare the bejesus out of our founding fathers. They wouldn't have had it. They wouldn't have tolerated it. A man who didn't believe in civilian control over the military would never be in the position that General Austin's in. Of course, that position wasn't around back then, but he would never be in that position. He would never have the authority that he has. He basically doesn't believe in self-government. That's what that tells you. It does. It's not hyperbolic. The founders knew that that was essential to self-government. Otherwise, you'll end up with like a junta, man. I mean, that's why Jefferson thought Hamilton was so damn dangerous. He questioned his loyalties to these principles. By the way, that's why the modern liberal and the Fox News Republican loves Alexander Hamilton. Because they believe in a dynamic, ever-powerful executive branch that can steamroll you whenever it wants. The only reason why Washington tolerated him is because Washington saw that the young republic was fragile. And he believed that, you know what, we got to take some risks to make sure that it stays together in these early years. Otherwise, it will not survive. Washington believed that wholeheartedly. And that's why he tolerated him and isolated Jefferson. He did. In the end, though, revenge of Jefferson. I mean, he ended up, being able to implement his own agenda, even though Jefferson believed in a strong defense. We had enemies at that time. We had threats from merchant pirates that he wanted to deal with. And he was not trusting of the United Kingdom at all, Great Britain at all. By the way, was he or was he not right? He was right. Ask poor Madison whether he was right. Ask poor Madison's wife, who loved being a DC socialite, when they burnt down the White House. So we have a defense secretary who doesn't believe in the bedrock principle of civilian control over the military, and our nation's top diplomat. That is what the Secretary of State is. He or she is the nation's top diplomat. We have a Secretary of State who doesn't believe in diplomacy. From Iraq to Ukraine, this man has been promoting the no peace talk policy against all of these straw men that they created. Think about this. Just sit and stew on it a little, folks. Marinate on it. The defense secretary doesn't believe in civilian control over the military, and the nation's top diplomat doesn't believe in diplomacy. So I dispute characterizing what is happening right now as sleepwalking into World War III. I vehemently disagree. I think they're operating at their best potential because these are not smart people. They're not very intelligent people. But also, I believe that they have their agenda and they're trying to implement that agenda. The problem is they're too stupid to realize that they can't deal with this one. Like, this isn't Iraq, folks. You make a blunder here, it's real war. Right. It's total, all-out, great power conflict over Ukraine. Unlike before Iraq, there's no peace dividend. There's no budget surplus. There's a $30 trillion debt, a decrepit military, depleted inventories. We're handing stuff to the Ukrainians that should be right here with us. Even after Trump's buildup, like the sit rep was horrible. Which is why, like we read last week, policy in the event of the U.S. fighting a two-front war with Russia and China at the same time just goes right to tactical nukes. It's right in the review. They know it can't be done. Well, that's the point. So, like Laura's, saying about them not being smart enough to make another plan, even if we could, that's true. But Laura, the thing is here, this is what it means. It makes it even more dangerous is that they don't really feel like it will ever, come to that, and that they have too much confidence in our ability, is what I'm saying.
But that's their hubris.
It is.
And guess what? Keep that mindset, and then when we're in war, what are you going to say then?
Yeah. And Norm, I want to answer this. This is a great question. And if, again, I hate to keep going back to the book club, but really the amount of information is so useful. Snyder talks about this, Norm, the ability, how difficult it is when a country overexpands or makes an error, how difficult it is to correct and reverse course and correct. It's almost, it doesn't happen quick. That's number one, if it happens at all. Because what happens even in a democratic system, which this is not, this is a cartelized system. This is not a democracy. Sorry, folks, but it is not. Go ahead.
I just really want you real quick to explain to people, though, that I know everybody's like boots on the ground. There are no boots on the ground. When we give military equipment,
I'll get there. Absolutely.
Tell them what that means and what it could be perceived as.
Yeah, there's a very, very fine and dangerous line between military advisors and what boots on the ground, could be considered. When you give the aid that we're giving to Ukraine, there are most definitely boots on the ground. They just don't want to tell you about them. Special operations teams have to teach them how to use these systems, how to teach them how to do maneuvers. Somebody from like mechanized infantry needs to teach them what to do with those M1 Abrams. You don't get in them and drive them like go-karts. If they get the F-16s that Zelensky is demanding now, right? By the way, Zelensky said you're an idiot, basically, if you don't believe that, if you're not willing to fund Ukraine. He trashed you the other day. In fact, I'm going to try to find that clip. But yeah, it doesn't, come with like an instruction manual, folks, and then that's it. There most definitely are boots on the ground. And after a while, unfortunately, what happens is a great power can just determine these are acts of war. All right, so you have committed troops, and now these are acts of war. So, Janet Yellen now in Ukraine. This is funny. Watching yet another torture of a young child. That's always something. I'm looking for. Yeah, I mean, how many times did that guy sniff during that speech the other day? Right, during that meeting. I mean, you got allergies in Ukraine like that? I'm saying, I mean, it's crazy. Look at how young this kid is. This is so sad. Look how young some of these children are. These are kids. These are kids. This is horrible. I think I'm actually going to show you this clip. Just hang tight. I think I am actually. It looks, any of these clips always, you got to be skeptical while you're watching them, but it certainly does look legit. I'm trying to get Zelensky's exact quote of what he said. And it was essentially, that you're not a good American if you don't want to fund Ukraine. And if I put this in, it'll come up. I'm trying to get the exact quote. Ukraine Nazis, that's a nice trend. Yeah, that basically we're selfish, but I want to get the actual quote. I don't want to attribute to, something somebody said. Yeah. If somebody's got it, it'd be great, but yeah, I'd love to see it. I'd love to poll Zelensky's favorability ratings myself because I just don't believe any of the other media outlets. How they word stuff is really funny, and especially when you're gauging how far Americans are willing to go to support Ukraine or Taiwan or any of that. The way the media words these questions is just, oh, right. He said we're in danger of losing NATO and our position in the world. So we should fund Ukraine. If we don't, then yeah, basically we're stupid and don't realize it, that Ukraine is it for them. Oh, here it is. Yep. If we don't change their opinion and support Ukraine, we're in danger of losing NATO and lose our leadership position in the world. Don't threaten me. Don't threaten me. You're in danger of losing your position as a great power when you overexpand. When you are the aggressor and you provoke a stronger alliance in the form of a balancing coalition that you do not have the power to deal with. Latent, military, economic, what have you. All right, so, and these kids are young. Let me show you this. If this is real, this is just horrible. This is just terrible if this is real. Hold on one second. Put it up here. I'm trying to get rid of some of this stuff. Make it quicker. All right, let's go. Hurry up. This is, I wouldn't be surprised because if you look at some of the actual numbers and estimates for possible, if you've looked at what they've committed to this fight, it is possible that they'd be sending kids, younger kids at this point into this. I don't know if it is, but look at some of how young some of these kids are. Look at this. These are babies. I remember when that looked like young Springer, Laura. That's what he reminds me of. That's what the baby faces of these kids. That's kind of what it reminds me of. Remember Springer I told you about? So really dirty trick the U.S. Army played on that kid. When you get into the 18 X-ray pipeline, there's some things that you have to do to qualify to even have a chance to make it on an ODA. Anyway, you presume you go through, you get your test scores, right? Physical fitness, right? And then you got to go through these preparatory courses, all of this. And you would think that age and maturity would be something that would be dealt with up front. Now, maybe it's because I was the second ever since George Bush made that program, the second cycle ever to go through. This poor kid, I'll never forget him. He was baby faced, just like those kids. He's like, parents had to sign him in, right? By the time he was done with most of the pipeline, he wasn't even 19 yet. So I think he was like one of those 17-year-olds that you could sign in. While meanwhile, our average age was like 30. So again, older, more mature people, still fit, still physically fit. But yeah, I was one of the younger ones at like 22 or 23. I don't even remember. Anyway, this poor kid goes through OSA, one station unit training, goes to the jump school, which is right up the road at Fort Benning. Everyone gets shipped over to Fort Bragg. You got to go through special operations, preparatory, and conditioning. Then you get to SFAS, and the Army just feels the need to tell him then that he's going to the 82nd Airborne because he's too young. He's not mature enough. Even though there was no like test that they implemented. But why am I telling this story? Because that is not Western. The modern Western military doesn't have images of little boys in trenches. Apparently, they are claiming that, you know, some of them are as young as 15 years old. I don't know if that's true. Or 16 years old. I don't know if that's true. I can't speak to that. But what I can speak to is that those are some baby face kids right there. Those are some really, really young kids. Yeah, I just looking at somebody's comment. Absolutely, Bakhmut. You know, we're being told that some say it's hundreds were slaughtered. I saw a report that it was 2,000 Ukrainians slaughtered in Bakhmut the other day. They are. So it looks like most of you are saying that they are drafting 16-year-old kids. That's really, really sad. And again, so when you hear that and you're looking at like what happened in Bakhmut, however you say it, then it's, you know, it's sad. I mean, they're saying that the things are getting better, that they're counterattacking. Anytime you say that, anytime you see propaganda saying that, yeah, it's bad, but we're launching these counterattacks every chance we get, folks, that's total BS. That's propaganda to the fullest extent. Like when Hitler was steamrolling the French army, they kept telling their civilians that they're launching these we're gearing up for these counterattacks. We just launched a counterattack and it was successful, and it wasn't. This is like the oldest trick in the war propaganda book. We've just waged another counterattack. No, you didn't. Not a successful one anyway. Russia still controls the territory, and that's it. Yeah, I mean, and this idea that you're wasting NATO and your position in the world, the only way the United States can lose its position in the world is if it overextends. And we have been in what most scholars would say is a period of overexpansion since Iraq, and we haven't stopped. And others would probably even say before that, like NATO, I know this is going to be crazy, but it's just true. People like Mearsheimer and others have argued that NATO should have been disbanded when the Soviet Union collapsed, because NATO was your very textbook balancing coalition against the Warsaw Pact. Once the Warsaw Pact was dissolved, then there was no need for NATO anymore. Its reason for existence was gone. So why on earth would you continue to do this and be the aggressor and expand? And again, I'm going to let this roll again because I'm going to beat it into people's heads. For anyone who would think that we aren't the aggressor here, all right? I'm going to keep playing. I may play this once a week. I'm not kidding.
To look at this and say the reason that the Russian army is on NATO, the Russian army is at NATO's doorstep is because NATO has expanded rather than the Russians expanding? That, in other words, NATO has moved closer to Russia rather than Russia moving closer to NATO? Is that not an accurate way to look at this?
I think that's the way President Putin probably looks at it. It's certainly not the way that we look at it.
You don't think that NATO has expanded eastward toward Russia?
NATO has expanded,
Okay.
and the expansion has been a good thing for.
So the reason that the Russian army is at NATO's doorstep is not the fault of the Russian army, it's not the Russian army that's done it. It's NATO has moved closer to moved
I'm pretty
east.
sure it wasn't NATO who was ordering, upwards of 15 battalion tactical groups to within 10 kilometers of the border with Ukraine, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't NATO who put little green men inside Ukraine to destabilize eastern cities.
I'm pretty sure that Ukraine is not a member of NATO. So unless that's changed,
it's not
okay.
changed. But I'm
So,
pretty sure the movement by Russia is Russia's decision.
if NATO has moved east, the reason that the Russian army is closer or on NATO's doorstep is because NATO moved. Not
NATO
because
is not an anti-Russia alliance. NATO is a security alliance.
For 50 years, it was an anti-Soviet alliance. So
Where's
do you
the
not
Soviet
understand
Union
it? So do you not understand how, or can you not even see how the Russians will perceive it as a threat? And the fact that it keeps getting closer to their border, while their troops, I mean, the places where their troops are, you say their troops are, and may have been in Ukraine and Georgia, are not NATO members.
I'm not going to pretend to know what goes in President Putin's mind or Russian military commanders. I mean, I barely got a history degree at the University of South Florida. What I can tell you, is that NATO is a defensive alliance. It remains a defensive alliance.
Fair enough, but it has moved east, correct? I mean, that's just a fact.
It has expanded, absolutely.
Right, exactly.
But there's no reason for anybody to think the expansion is a hostile or threatening move. And we've been saying that throughout the last 15 years, Matt.
It's like you're moving closer to Russia. You're blaming the Russians for being close to NATO.
No.
That's exactly what Hegel
We're
said.
blaming the Russians for violating the territorial integrity of Ukraine and destabilizing the security
which is
situation
not a
inside
NATO
Europe.
member. Which is not a NATO member.
I see to you
Other
on
countries
that
feel threatened.
All right, so obviously, I'm going to make this point over and over and over until this becomes indisputable, because it is indisputable. It's not up for debate. NATO is most definitely the aggressor. It's geography. It's not a matter of opinion. NATO has expanded. Russia has not. All right? The borders of Russia are not moving closer to NATO. The borders of NATO are moving closer to Russia. So for whatever reason, you want to think one is a good guy and a bad guy in this, in this story, that's whatever. That's not the way foreign policy works. But if that's the way you want to phrase it in your mind, then that's fine. But you still, even if you do, you still cannot debate that Russia is the actual aggressor here. If Russia decided to make a satellite state out of Mexico or across the border of Niagara Falls, right? Maybe Alberta, something like that. Without a doubt, the United States would view that to be a threatening or a hostile policy toward the United States, and they would never accept a Russian satellite state or an Eastern European bulwark in the Western Hemisphere. Never. No hegemon would ever do that. No great power, period. Doesn't even have to be a hegemonic power. No great power would accept that. We didn't accept it during the Civil War when the French tried to seize control of Mexico. That happened. You probably don't know about it. We didn't accept it when the Spanish still owned Florida. We didn't accept it. We couldn't. We didn't. We didn't accept it when the United Kingdom and parts of France had satellites in Canada. We didn't accept it when the Soviet Union tried to make satellite states out of Latin American countries or Cuba and the rest, and on and on. When the Germans tried to make a satellite state out of Argentina. Nobody accepts it. It doesn't happen because it is aggression. It is aggression. When a great power in another hemisphere sees the rise of another one, they try to thwart the rise of that power. And satellite states near your border are acts of aggression. And I mean, this is common knowledge in security studies. Common knowledge. And to pretend like we're just the good guys here is insane. It's intellectually dishonest. All right. What am I going to say? No opinion or undecided. I want to run this by you guys real quick. Let me get rid of that and pull up this other one. I want to run this by you guys. So we have, and I'll show you the Republican candidates that we have all put up here. All right, so here we have the Democratic ones. I see a lot of the polls. The IBD tip poll came out, or Issues Insights tip poll. Trump is at or just above 50. DeSantis is the only one who's got any other level of support after that. They actually did, some people were not including. Chris Christie is in there. Someone else, prefer not to say. We're not doing that. We're simply going to put people in there. Tim Scott is in there, right? Yeah, because he should be, because he is really considering. Or Mike Pompeo is. Maybe for now we'll remove Tim Scott. Maybe we'll do that. Because while he is talking, he absolutely is weighing this. With Nikki Haley in, now being someone else from South Carolina, that absolutely has to factor into his decision-making. Also, plus, I know for a fact those two are allies in the anti-Trump struggle. So I don't know that he would find it beneficial unless Nikki Haley doesn't pick up steam, because she hasn't. If she doesn't pick up steam, he may say, all right, I'm getting in. But for right now, we may remove Tim Scott. On the Democratic side, they have some people in here like Jared Polis, who's the governor of Colorado. We really haven't heard much on that. Cory Booker, Elizabeth Warren, Amy Klobuchar, a whole bunch of people. This is all we got so far. So we do have Gavin Newsom because we know he wants to run. Michelle Obama we're putting in there because it's by popular request. Also, don't put it below her. She is not beneath this. All right. Pete Buttigieg, Kamala Harris, all both justifiable. Hillary Clinton will forever want to be president. She has to go in there. Bernie Sanders said he is thinking about it and has not ruled it out because he has run already twice. We can't dismiss that. So we're putting him in there. We know Gavin Newsom wants to run for president. All right. The only thing is there is this dynamic in the Democratic Party right now where Biden just has too many people who are loyal, not because they love him. They're loyal to him because they feel like he beat Trump in 2020 and that he's the guy to do it again. I think there's a serious flaw in that argument, although I'm not sure I want to share it in great detail. But Biden only beat Trump even with the COVID crap. He did it because of that. But also, he was not disliked the way he is now. This idea that he's a decent guy and you're indecent if you vote for Trump over somebody decent like Biden. Go back and listen to his nomination speech, folks, at the DNC. Go listen to it. Go listen to his debate performances. Go listen to his ads. Go look at their messaging. Decent, 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 over and over again. Michelle Obama, decent, 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 decent at the DNC. Why? Because that's a social bias campaign. They're trying to shame you into voting for Joe Biden. I don't think it would be that strong at all this time, because the truth is Joe Biden's never been a decent person. He's always been a dirty old man who can't keep his hands to himself, and he's a prick. He's a notoriously bad temper prick. And if you get under his skin, he's nasty. All right, so let's just do unsure, no opinion. I don't know. There may be room in these for someone else. Right now, like I said, let's go back to page 6 because we're almost out of time, and I wanted to just go over this with you. And if you have any other Democrats that you think should be in there, then by all means, let me know. People, I'll tell you right now, I'm not putting Vivek in there until I see him gain any real traction. And as of right now, outside of a couple appearances on Newsmax and an endorsement by what's his name? Scott Adams, right? I just don't see it. There is this, it's not that it's impossible. It's just there really is this mindset among, and I know because I know a lot of these guys, especially men, these like rich businessmen, and maybe they're not super, super rich, but they think Trump did it so they can do it. They don't seem to understand that Trump, number one, was a master marketer and a master brander. And number two, he had universal name recognition. They think because Trump did it, they can do it. This is very, very, very foolish. All right. So I don't know how many more campaigns we got to see go down for governor. There was one in California. Anthony Trimino, right? Great guy, went down in flames. I can count, I don't have enough fingers on both hands to count how many congressmen thought they could do it like Donald Trump. They went down. So I just don't see it for president, folks. It's a big, big deal. And that's it, Mr. Butterworth. Great. They didn't see this stuff. But right, that's why I'm saying this time, I don't think it's going to work. My dad showered with me when I was sexually mature. I was turned on by different dudes. I was over-sexual. Yeah, that stuff's not going to work this time. And not to mention, he has publicly lost his temper now on numerous occasions. It's just the decency argument. It's over. It's over. I just don't see how it's going to happen. Pompeo we're keeping in, even if we remove Tim Scott. We're keeping in Pompeo because I know that he's really talking about it. I may do someone else for now, just to kind of gauge whether or not there's a lane for someone else. I don't know, though. I don't know. What's this BitChute video, Laura? What are you doing? She obviously wants to show me. Oh, you got... Oh, here it is. Okay, yeah. Let's do this real quick before we go. And that's great, Laura. Thank you. Thank you for that. All right, oops, wrong one. Actually, I want to keep the questionnaire up because not up on the show, but up for me because I want to continue to work on it. Yeah, public polling project link is in there. I'd appreciate it if everybody shared it far and wide. Contribute if you can. But for time's sake, we're going to have to get out there soon. So I think it's like a fourth funded if you count the overfunding of other projects. But we have to get out there soon because it's really, we got to get out there. All right, let's look at Mr. Zelensky here. Thanks for that, by the way, Laura. Dead beat. Oh, my God. Hat tip to whomever did this. I don't know who did it, but hat tip to them, and I'll credit them in a second.
I can tell them only one thing. If they do not change their opinion, if they do not understand us, if they do not support Ukraine, they will lose NATO, they will lose the clout of the United States, they will lose the leadership position that they are enjoying in the world.
Oh no, friends. According to Voldemort Zelensky, he's over here, if we don't continue funneling billions of dollars a minute into Ukraine, we might lose NATO.
So obviously not going over well with a bunch of people. And I think that Zelensky's image is probably going to take a hit from this. If it's already going to look, I don't care how many people say they liked him before. There's an extreme Russophobia out there. That's not going to last forever. But I will say that I do think that over time, Americans will do what they always do, which is lose their appetite for this, and they will turn on Vladimir Zelensky. That is going to happen. And he probably knows it himself, which is why he's begging for planes, and he needs things that he needs now rather than later, so he doesn't end up like Muammar Gaddafi and others who sided with the U.S., who were, didn't end up well. Let me just real quick say about the poll before we go. I do, like I said, I'm gonna think about it a little bit more, but I do think I'm gonna add someone else before, like here, I'll show you what I mean. Just to gauge whether or not there's a lane for someone who hasn't yet declared or someone who is out there kind of, hovering. So for instance, what do I mean by that? So, someone else, just simple, very simple right there, right? This also, by the way, would be fixed like we do with unsure, no opinion. Remember that? That's fixed. This way, when logic, because it is randomized, the question itself is randomized, right? The options, one day Mike Pence or one respondent will get Mike Pence first. Another respondent will get Pompeo first. And here, actually, I will remove Tim Scott, all right? Because for now, maybe that will be included in the someone else. All right, going down to Joe Biden real quick. I decided maybe not to add, here we go, someone else. Screwed him up here. Fixed, yes. Unsure, no opinion. Fixed, whoops, fixed. And make sure this is randomized. This I don't think is randomized. Boom. Yeah, I was going to say, do you want Joe Biden to run again or not? And I didn't, because I'm thinking like, the IBD tip poll, I think, has Joe Biden at like 38%. Others do as well. Like, that obviously means that more than half of Democratic primary voters do not want Joe Biden to be the nominee. I may add it. I'm not sure. If you have any other suggestions, leave them in the comments. I'd love to hear them. By the way, I saw your stuff about Jam and Bean on Rumble. Saw you guys talking about that, and Laura grabbed that and sent it over. I told you it will not disappoint you. They said it is awesome. They got their Jam and Bean this weekend, and it is awesome coffee. It is. And by the way, like I said, great group of patriots. I love those guys. And the roaster has a gift. That coffee is good. And there's something for everybody. Frankly, I love chocolatey tones and stuff. You could be different, but they got something for everybody. All right. And promo, you just took words right out of my mouth. Don't forget, promo code TPP, whether you're going to jamandbean.com to get your coffee or Field of Greens to get what you need every day, 5 healthy doses of fruit and vegetables that aren't supplements or extracts. They come from whole vegetables, all right, quality vegetables. And once you start, you will feel a difference. Keep it simple. Check out, same code for both. Promo code TPP. All right. Again, the link for the public polling project is in the description on Rumble, on YouTube. I don't know. It probably is on Getter. But if not, I'll throw it in the Getter thing. I believe it is. Support it if you can. Share it far and wide. If everybody who watched the show gave $1 or a couple of bucks, it would get funded in no time. All right. So we got to get out there regardless. So I got to kind of push up the schedule a little bit. And then the culture question, we'll discuss more in a little bit of detail why I chose the one that I chose. And really there's 2 of them, but one sets it all up. And I'll credit who did it for their suggestion. I just turned it into a phrasable question, a correctly worded question. But I love the idea of asking whether or not modern entertainment, media and entertainment, culture, the humanities, arts, music, whether or not people feel that these humanities reflect their values, attack their values, or are neutral to their values. And those will be the 3 options. Do you feel that they represent your values, that they're are attacking your values, or if they're neutral towards your values? And then from there, we can ask a series of other questions that, really just one right now, because I want to keep it kind of short. We have on this questionnaire, we have so far, in addition to nominations, well, I'll tell you everything. There's a registered voter screen. There is the new likely voter screen, which I don't think I showed you. I told you, pop it up. It always goes 2024. 4 cycle. We are going to ask about enthusiasm. Why did I decide to keep enthusiasm in there? It is very clear to me that when Donald Trump is not on the ballot, a group of working class voters who are not only white, and in fact, the main problem isn't just with white people. It's non-college educated voters, period. Hispanic, black, white. Without Donald Trump on the ballot, Republicans cannot get these people to come out and vote. And I want to know if there is an increased enthusiasm level for them. Are they on par with some of these other groups? Like, we did not see them on par with them leading into 2022. We did not see them on par in 2018. In 16 and 20, they were gangbuster. So now that Trump is running again, is it him? I want to know. I want to see. The likelihood to vote between that and enthusiasm, it'll tell me among certain groups what that deal is. If it becomes apparent to me, I will straight ask the question, and I may add it this time. If they chose Trump, if he is not the nominee, will they still vote? I may add that as a follow-up question, because I'm telling you, one of the central questions this year is whether or not those voters will come out and vote. Even if there is a swing back to the suburbs, which, by the way, we were going over, another pollster and I were going over a couple of, well, one was Arizona, the other one was Georgia in great detail. And ironically, you would never hear this from the media. But if you look at the trend from 16 to 20 among urban, rural, and suburban areas, you will actually see in some of these states that there was a slight bounce back when Trump was on the ballot among support for Republicans in the suburbs. When you're looking at 18 and 2022, they crater. So isn't that funny? Right? In those in two very important states. And again, that was using census data, not media exit polling, Edison Research. That's using census, household, large, verified surveys, which we do. And Pew does a good job too, by the way. Pew Research, they do. I just take the census. It's much more comprehensive, and it's attempting to do post-election what we try to do pre-election with our polling, which is make it as verifiable as possible. All right, so we got this. We got the likely voter screen. We changed the vote history. It is no longer, obviously, I previously voted in 2022. We now go from, it is always a 4-cycle timeline. All right. And then I've never voted. This, of course, will be matched with the voter file when people are asked, which we do now every time. So we make sure they're telling us the truth, right? See if anybody's particularly lying. Are there groups that are more often aligned than not? Anyway, direction of country, registered voter economic confidence index, Biden's approval. I left this on here. I'm probably going to drop most of them. I'm going to keep the economy and jobs. I'm going to keep immigration. And I'm going to keep foreign policy for sure. I may drop inflation and I may drop crime, but that depends on how big the overall survey is when we're done. All right. And the culture questions will determine that. And then now, if this has got logic. If they had answered, it's a good thing I checked that. Of course, I would have known that anyway. But where are you? Where's the primary question? That's weird. Must have not saved. I may have to purge the cache, but yeah. Anyway, depending on if they say they're going to vote in the Democratic primary, the Republican primary, they'll get one or two of these pages. In the Republican, and there is no option for I don't know. Right now, we will see how many people say they're going to vote in the Republican nomination primary, how many will say they're going to vote in the Democrat, and we will track that over time. There is no I don't know yet. I'm unsure. We want to know which one independents are going to vote in more than the other. All right, or not. Maybe they'll be evenly split, but we want to know. So they will have no choice but to answer that question, which I may have deleted the wrong likely voter, and that's probably why there's no nomination. But anyway, they'll get that logic. If there's Democrat, they'll get that logic. And then we'll do some hypotheticals. I don't know how many I'm going to do here. This is just Trump and Biden with a lean. I may do something dynamic where whatever is like the top 2 vote getters, we'll do something like that. We'll see. And comfortable expressing political beliefs is our social desirability. And of course, party affiliation, ideology. I'm really thinking about too this like populism index. I really have to put some thought into this. But I feel like the 3 ideologies are not, they're the exit polls, but they are not sufficient anymore. I'm not saying disrupt that question, but if they choose conservative, moderate, whatever, maybe they get a follow-up. Everyone gets a follow-up that says, do you consider yourself a populist, right? And maybe they're not even aware of what that is. But in today's age, I feel like there's got to be more. It really does. Anyway, gender, age, the normal demographics, white origin, ethnic origin, Hispanic ethnic origin, Asian ethnic origin. We're like one of the only people who do that. I think we are the only people who do that. And it's very, very telling. Employment demographics, right? Including union, and then which kind of union, are you public or private or both, union household, education, income, marital status, parental status, veteran, military or not status, religious demographics. Are you an evangelical if you pick the Protestant or other? And then regional demographics. Do you live in an urban, suburban, or rural area? And we do not wait for area. You would be surprised how many people don't know what they live in. And then region, which we will know from Match It. All right. And then thank you. Goodbye. You're been very important to us. If we test it real quick, let's see what we're at right now. So a 7-minute survey with a pretty nasty fatigue. Not nasty, I mean pretty decent fatigue and decent accessibility. Wait until we add the culture questions and we'll decide whether or not that hurts it too much. 7 minutes for me, folks. It's a long time. I can't stand 7-minute surveys. We'll have to see, though. All right. Wednesday, don't forget, noon Eastern Standard Time. YouTube members, don't forget that you now will have access to the Locals Book Club, as you should. I'm glad I thought of that and figured that out. When it is Sunday, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And again, I got to keep doing this. Don't forget. Sorry about that. That was Zelensky butting in again. Yeah, don't forget, share the public polling project far and wide. And let's get this thing rocking. All right, thanks for watching Inside the Numbers, folks. See you again. Oh, go ahead, Laura. Oh, I forgot. Quite frankly, I will be on Quite Frankly tonight at around 7:20. But just tune in at 7 when Quite Frankly starts. I'll share it on Locals. I'll share it on Twitter and share it on Getter. We're going to have a great conversation. We have a lot of cool stuff planned on Quite Frankly tonight. The conversation will be different, but incredible. So don't miss it. If you don't know, Quite Frankly, I mean, I'm sure you do. Great show. Check out my buddy Frank. I'll be posting it anyway, so you'll see. But look, I'm very much looking forward to this. We haven't spoken since, I think, right after Christmas. So it's been a while, and there's a lot to talk about. So we'll see. Thanks for reminding me about that, Laura. Streaming on the ticker. All right. And let it stream for the outro. We'll see you guys tonight, and we'll see you on Wednesday. All the best. Thanks for watching.
How much you wanna up it, that I can get you back inside your head. Before the summer ends and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be, I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette.